On your wedding night in medieval Europe, you weren't just expected to consummate your marriage. You were expected to prove it. Because if the sheets weren't stained the right way the next morning, your marriage could be annulled. Your family could be shamed. And in some cases, you could be sent back home in disgrace. This is the strange, invasive, and honestly kind of ridiculous history of how medieval society tried to test if a bride was a virgin, and the clever ways women found to beat the system. Let's start with why this was such a big deal in the first place. In medieval Europe, marriage wasn't really about love. It was about property and inheritance. Titles, land, and wealth passed down through the eldest son, a system called primogeniture. But that only works if a husband can be completely sure his son is actually his son. There was no DNA testing, no way to confirm paternity. So virginity became a kind of insurance policy. A virgin bride meant no doubt about whose child came first. This wasn't a small cultural quirk. It shaped how women were raised, watched, and, on their wedding night, physically inspected. The most common proof was simple: blood on the wedding night sheets. The belief was that breaking the hymen during first intercourse would cause bleeding, so blood meant virginity confirmed. In some households, the sheet was taken off the bed the next morning and shown to family members. Sometimes it was even displayed more publicly, as proof that the marriage had been consummated and that the bride had been pure. One famous case involves Catherine of Aragon. Legend says she kept her bloodstained wedding sheets for years and later used them as evidence during her marriage annulment case with Henry VIII. Using them to prove her marriage to Henry's older brother had never been consummated at all. But it wasn't only about the sheets. In many cases, a midwife would physically examine the bride, sometimes before the wedding, sometimes after, to check the state of her hymen. This was treated as a medical method at the time, even though it had basically zero scientific basis. A hymen can be affected by all kinds of normal physical activity that has nothing to do with sex. Horseback riding, for example. It proves almost nothing. But that didn't stop it from being treated as reliable evidence. Some midwives were honest in their assessments. Others, out of loyalty or sympathy, quietly lied to protect a bride they cared about. Either way, a woman's entire reputation could rest on one stranger's physical judgment. And it gets stranger. Medieval physicians came up with a whole set of pseudoscientific tests that sound almost like folk magic today. One was called the smoke test. A woman was covered with cloth and fumigated with smoke from below. The idea was that if she was a virgin, she wouldn't smell the smoke through her mouth and nose. If she did smell it, she supposedly failed the test. Another was a urine test. A woman would drink a certain concoction, and if she immediately needed to urinate, she was judged not to be a virgin. Some ancient physicians even believed you could tell virginity just from the pitch of a woman's voice or the shape of her body. None of this had any real medical grounding, but at the time, it was treated as legitimate science. Here's the part of this story that's honestly kind of satisfying. Women were not powerless in this system. There was a well-known medieval medical text called the Trotula that quietly circulated practical advice for getting through a virginity test undetected. One tip was timing the wedding for when a woman was already on her period, which would guarantee blood on the sheets regardless of anything else. Another was hiding a small vial of animal blood. Chicken or goat blood was common, since most households had farm animals nearby, and secretly dabbing it onto the sheets in the dark. In some folklore accounts, there are even stories of a bride being quietly swapped with another woman for the act of consummation itself, and then swapped back before anyone noticed. These workarounds were common enough that men eventually became suspicious of blood-stained sheets in general, which honestly tells you everything you need to know about how flawed this whole system was from the very beginning. So what actually happened if a woman failed one of these tests? The consequences varied depending on region, class, and circumstance, but they range from social humiliation to the marriage being fully annulled. In some cases, a woman could be sent back to her family in disgrace, which wasn't just emotionally devastating. It was a serious financial blow, since her family had often already paid a dowry to secure the marriage in the first place. And there's an obvious double standard running through all of this. Grooms were never subjected to an equivalent test. Purity was demanded of women and essentially never expected of men. The entire weight of proof fell on one side of the marriage. While all of this sounds like distant medieval history, versions of virginity testing, including physical hymen exams and blood ceremony traditions, are still practiced in parts of the world today. Major international health organizations have publicly stated these tests have no real scientific validity and can cause serious harm. So this isn't purely a story about the past. It's a reminder that a practice can look official or scientific for centuries and still be based on nothing at all. So next time someone tells you, that's just how it's always been done, remember, people once tried to test virginity using smoke and urine. Always been done has never meant actually made sense. If you found this as wild as I did, stick around. I'm covering the weirdest, most taboo corners of medieval life every week. Next up, what actually happened when the plague hit a medieval village? You do not want to miss that one.